This is Senate Appropriations, and we are continuing our work on the FY 2024 budget. And with us today, we have Natural Resources Agency and the individual departments that are within that agency. So I see we have the secretary all ready to kick off the testimony, and we'll start with you, Julie, and then move down through the individual departments. I see we have a large document here. We kind of rely on the House to get into individual lines. Anything to do with a normal fee-for-space retirement, you know, all of that. Don't go into that, but really, what are the highlights? And also, you know, there are a whole lot of fairly significant policy initiatives that are, you know, you're managing, might be helpful. Up to date on that as well.
Absolutely. It sounds like the presentation here matches, and also happy to answer questions as I go along. For the record, I'm Julie Moore, Secretary of Natural Resources, and I'm joined by Maggie Gendron, who's the Deputy Secretary, and Meg Kleinfelder, who's the Chief Financial Officer for the agency. Also, two of our three commissioners are here, but we'll leave it to them to introduce themselves and their teams as we get to their presentations. I am going to share my screen.
Are you basically putting on the screen what we have here?
Yes. Yeah, but that way you can just see where I'm at, hopefully, if that's helpful. If you'd rather be able to see who's in the meeting.
No, excuse me. Oh, Simon's gonna kiss a fool. You ever heard that statement?
No.
I'll be right over, Rich. Oh well, we have fun in this community, nothing more.
You say that after you sneeze or to avoid sneezing?
No, after you do, it's a sign.
Okay.
All right, so agenda.
On that note, I'll jump right in. So I thought I'd talk at the agency level just a little bit about what I see as the highlights from our budget, some of the key changes. There are a significant number of one-time investments proposed, Senator Kitchell, as you alluded to, and then specifically speak to the Secretary's office, where there are also some fairly significant changes. So the governor's FY24 recommend for the Agency of Natural Resources is just north of $230 million. I have reflected in several instances that when I started in this job about 7 years ago, our budget was $125 million. Much of the difference there is the dramatic increase we've seen in federal funds, particularly over the last several years. And in the current year alone, we're seeing a $42.5 million increase in federal funds. The other significant change in the budget during my tenure has been the dramatic commitment to clean water work, having gone from just a few $1 million a year to about $30 million a year right now in general funds. In addition to what's sort of reflected in our FY24 budget, outside of that, obviously, is the ARPA funding. And since FY22, the agency has been appropriated over $160 million in ARPA funds directly, along with stewarding about $30 million in ARPA funds directed to the Clean Water Board. But none of those show up in the totals here. Currently, we have about 650 full-time employees. 50 of those are limited service positions that have been brought on to support the administration of these federal funds.
Are they filled?
Many of them are. The technical positions largely are filled. The budget or business office positions have been much more challenging to find applicants for. I think it's partly the technical positions are sort of mission work and attract people to the mission of the agency, and the business office positions are maybe less attractive from that perspective. And about 2/3 of our overall budget will be passed through, mostly to municipalities, or the lion's share to municipalities, but also to contractors and partner organizations. About 80% of our budget is either special funds or federal funds, and we again have fully utilized what we see as the projected revenue, particularly in our special funds, and are continue to be challenged by the fact that our federal funds have been largely stagnant for the entirety of my tenure, and at this point more than a decade. So the upward pressure in our budget our base budget,
Special funds you're talking about?
federal funds.
Okay.
So particularly the money we receive from the EPA through the Performance Partnership Agreement, and this is most pronounced in Commissioner Bealing's budget, has been stagnant for more than a decade at this point. So the upward pressure in our budget is disproportionately borne by general fund, and our budget includes a $1.9 million increase, or about 4.5%. Overall, or 5.6% increase in our general fund allocation. Just looking at how the budget breaks down across the agency's 3 departments, obviously the lion's share of the FY24 budget sits in the Department of Environmental Conservation, in large part again because they are disproportionately responsible for administering those federal funding programs. Fish and Wildlife and Forests and Parks each have budgets in the range of $30 million. And then the Central Office or Secretary's Office is about $7 million and is also responsible for administering the payment in lieu of taxes and our pays each year on our 360,000 acres of state-owned land.
New Climate Office, is that within the central office or within DC?
No, it's within the Central Office. And I'll talk a little bit more about that too. So just looking at the different types of money that comprise our budget, the blue block on the left-hand side is our federal funds. That red block represents general funds, and then all of the other blocks represent different special fund sources. Parks Fund, Permit Funds, Clean Water Fund, etc. So there are a handful of key changes in our budget. 2 of them I'll take up as I dive into the Secretary's Office budget, which is the Climate Office, and I'm calling it a true up, as well as our continued work around civil rights and environmental justice. Commissioner Fitzko, when she's in later, will speak to the forestry reclassification, which is a significant upward pressure in the FPR budget. As I noted in my introduction, there are a lot of one-time investments included in the governor's recommend. Several of them related to climate work, including $900,000 for the continued sort of technical analysis tools and training that's being offered by the Climate Action Office. The Clean Heat Homes program, which I'll speak to in a bit more detail. An expansion of our refrigerant management program, which is a very cost-effective way to get after greenhouse gas emissions, even though the amount they represent in our overall emissions is relatively small, and then some work needed around our environmental justice positions. And the commissioners will take up the one-time initiatives in their budget, but if you notice, it totals upwards of $25 million, all in across the 3 departments in the Secretary's Office.
Is that BEIC's program or EBT's refrigerator management program? Or is it just that you're having BEIC do your refrigerator management program?
Correct. It would essentially, they have an opportunity to draw down some additional funding with match. And so this would provide state match. And I believe that they are able to pull down $1 for every $2 of state funding provided from a federal funding source. In addition, there are a number of items that are included in the capital bill and as part of the general fund to cash fund investments that the governor proposed. I'm showing them here, not knowing exactly what the General Assembly's preference will be for how those are treated, but we're happy to speak to any or all of those as well. It includes the replacement of one or hopefully both of our ailing park maintenance facility buildings in Killington and Groton. A lot of work Commissioner Bealing could speak to take full advantage of federal funds available to us under the bipartisan infrastructure law primarily, as well as the Army Corps of Engineers and the Water Resources Development Act, and then some investments in our fish and wildlife infrastructure as well.
Is Groton the Noise Pond, that place, or somewhere else in Groton?
No, it's Danny's not here. It's not.
Okay.
It isn't Say-on Lodge. It's an actual maintenance facility that serves that entire region of the state.
I think I might have visited. They were doing an add-on with Conservation Corps.
Correct. There's several outbuildings there, and some of them are of historical significance.
So we'll hear more from the individual department.
Correct. Each individual department will be able to speak to these in detail. So just a note about the position changes. We did receive approval largely this past summer to hire a significant number of limited service positions to support our deployment of both the ARPA funds as well as the IIJA or bipartisan infrastructure law. And we are working through those monies right now. Our 24 budget would establish 4 additional limited service positions in FPR to support some of the funding opportunities they have under the IIJA related to our state's forest action plan, as well as a limited service position that would be supported in FPR out of the Clean Water Fund. Just help that agency keep up with the obligations we've extended to municipalities under the TMDL, particularly related to stormwater runoff from forest roads, of which we own about 600 miles. So just a representation of how those positions look across the agency. As you would likely expect, the majority of them are in DEC and go along with the resources that have flowed there. But there are at least one position in each department. Oh, good, it doesn't block it up there. And there is a clean water position in Fish and Wildlife, I believe, as well as FPR, or just in FPR. And then the environmental justice piece, which I will come back to in just a minute. So trying to kind of roll up and summarize the priorities for the agency. These were the things that come immediately to mind. The successful deployment of these ARPA and IIJA funds. In particular, the ARPA funds are time bound, as I know you all are aware. And we have gone to great lengths to create programs and now solicit applications to those programs in a competitive nature. We believe we are on track to expend all of the ARPA dollars that have been appropriated to the agency. We're continuing our work related to PFAS monitoring and response. Commissioner Beeling can speak to that in more detail, but it dovetails with the announcement by EPA last week of their new draft drinking water standards, as well as litigation that we are pursuing with the Attorney General's office against the manufacturers of PFAS and the contamination they've created in Vermont. Work to complete the PCB testing and then remediation for what we find in Vermont schools. At this point, we've tested just about 10% of all of the school buildings we believe need testing in Vermont. Of the ones we've tested, about a quarter of them have had at least one room that exceeded our PCB indoor air standards. And so that work continues. It's going perhaps a little more slowly than we had hoped, but it is continuing to progress.
Can you remind me when we hope we get through all schools and when you think we'll get through all schools?
So we had come back last year and asked for a 2-year extension in the time frame. We were given a 1-year extension in the time frame. So our target is to complete that testing by June 30, 2025. I think that we will struggle to meet that timeline. It just challenges with contractor capacity, but also challenges with lab capacity. There aren't a lot of places in the country doing indoor air testing, and so we are very much beholden to a very small handful of labs performing the testing.
You're only doing schools built before a certain.
1980.
Yeah, correct. Built or significantly renovated before 1980.
It's still a lot.
It is a lot. 320 plus or minus school buildings statewide that fall into that category. So, and it's not, there may be whole wings of buildings that don't need to be tested because they were more modern wings, so we have PCBs and construction materials potentially, but we have to at least get into 320.
So you only got 30 done.
Correct.
Ways to go.
Yeah, there is a ways to go. I would be remiss if not noting our ongoing implementation of Vermont's Clean Water Act and Act 76, which established clean water service providers. Our budget this year for clean water, as a result of the property transfer tax outperforming itself yet again, is north of $60 million. I think this is our largest investment yet in the FY24 budget when it comes to clean water. That's across not just ANR, but the Agriculture Agency, VTrans, and ACCD as
So
well.
how, I know that it's gonna take a long time.
Yes.
Many of us will probably be looking down at Lake Champlain. But how are we doing in terms of the initiatives? Or are we seeing anything to give us encouragement that what has happened to date is yielding anything measurable or identified? I know that it took decades to build up. It's going to take decades to significantly improve. But so anything that you're seeing today?
We have a water performance report that we produce each year where we are keeping track of a whole set of measures and metrics.
By watershed.
By watershed, exactly. And are able to speak to sort of the really significant adoption by farmers of a number of different conservation practices at this point. Work that's been done by municipalities around improving stormwater management, both from larger tracts of impervious surface, but also their road network. And then the Fish and Wildlife Department has been engaged in a very significant wetland conservation and restoration initiative that's resulted in several hundred, if not a couple thousand acres of restored wetlands in the Champlain Basin. So from the project's perspective, we know that we're sort of gaining traction and picking up speed. We've estimated that we've reduced overall the load by about 15%. From where we were to where we are now. It hasn't manifested itself in statistically significant changes, either in phosphorus concentrations in Lake Champlain or the number of days that beaches are closed due to green algae blooms. And some of that's a function of the fact that weather is noisy, and so it's going to be hard to see small changes year to year. And some of it is just these are really big, complicated ecosystems.
So as the temperature rises, and somebody gave me it was a staggering statistic, how our growing season has expanded. And of course, then we've been with warmer weather, growing season, that has to have an impact on the progress we're able to make, I would think, in terms of algae. Isn't there a connection with temperature and water temperature control?
There is. There's no specific formula where we can say it's these sets of conditions that you're guaranteed to have a bloom, but we know that generally warmer weather, years with more intense and frequent precipitation, times when there's little wind, tend to be a set of conditions that support those really noxious blooms. But there's also pieces we just don't know. We've been doing some very detailed monitoring work in Lake Carmi, working with UVM researchers, and they actually have a buoy out that collects real-time data.
That's the last report.
Yeah, Lake Carmi had a very difficult summer this year. And much, I think, to my dismay, but many people's dismay, in that we'd invested very heavily in an aeration system and it just didn't seem able to keep up. And collected all this really high resolution data about what's going on in Lake Carmi. And it appears while things are starting to slow from the watershed, we're actually seeing more phosphorus being released from bottom sediments. So the next step, and Commissioner Beeling can speak to this too, is looking at an alum treatment for Lake Carmi.
Oh, and also maybe Lake Maury.
Both of those, excuse me, are contemplated in the clean
Lake Maury
FY24.
already has an alum treatment back in the 90s.
Yeah, it may have even been the late 80s. It's been quite a while, more than 30 years for certain.
Time flies.
It does. And then finally, just we have a number of initiatives related to expanding Vermont's outdoor recreation offerings. By virtue of some of the CARES Act money, as well as some state one-time money, we've made significant investments in state-owned infrastructure and trying to improve their accessibility, as well as through the VOREC program, the Vermont Outdoor Recreation and Economic Collaborative, helping invest in local community recreational assets. So just looking at our budget, this is the Secretary's Office budget year over year. You can see that it had another significant proposed increase from FY24 as compared to 23 and 22. And this is really a reflection of the fact that we brought two significant programs into the Secretary's Office, the Climate Office, as well as the Environmental Justice Unit. And both of these are new to ANI.
Your warranties up.
Back to you about your car warranty.
Yeah, sure.
So just in terms of how the budget is distributed across the different programs in the Secretary's Office, we have consolidated our legal services from all three departments into the Secretary's Office, and there's some management advantages to that model that I'm happy to speak to. Administrative services, including for our regional offices, ANR continues to have 5 regional offices around the state. The Secretary's Office itself, which is Maggie, myself, an executive assistant, our policy and planning team, which leads the agency's engagement in Act 250 and Section 248 proceedings, and then the Climate Action Office. And so the big changes in the Secretary's Office budget this year are what I would describe as a Climate Office true-up. We had sort of come in and said we had 8 generic positions, 4 of which already existed within different parts of the agency. We've moved them in, had a couple of grants that have run their course. And so a portion of what we're proposing this year is to true up that budget. And we believe this reflects the cost of operating the Climate Office. In addition, Act 154 did establish an environmental justice policy for Vermont. It created responsibilities for the agency, and 3 positions. Unfortunately, they came through in the final budget as limited service positions, even though we know that they're permanent. The governor's recommend included the extended limited service funding for those positions for 1 more year, but really looking to the General Assembly to sort of work through with us what is needed and what the expectations are for this work within the agency on an ongoing
Is
basis.
that one-time funding now? The ones with the limited service? Are you asking for conversion-based funding?
The way it's in the governor's recommend is one-time funding again, with his direction to us to work with the General Assembly to try to get this squared away. There was not money.
That was our.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes.
But there's not a proposal there, where this work is yet to happen.
Correct. The governor's recommend includes one-time money to continue those positions.
There's no proposals when you say you're going to work with the legislature on figuring it out going forward.
We've put together a memo of what we believe the costs are. It's not limited to the positions as part of the challenge, that there's ongoing work related to public engagement, development and maintenance of a mapping tool. What am I forgetting?
Language access.
Language access that also wasn't budgeted for last year.
So the 900 is one-time money then? That we got here? Oh, I'm on the next page,
Oh.
sorry.
For the Climate Office?
Yeah.
This is, right, so there's a base budget appropriation of about 1.2 million that includes that true up, and then on top of that, there is a $900,000 one-time proposal included in the governor's budget that will help us round out some of the technical analysis priorities identified by the Climate Council, as well as in particular support the rollout of the Municipal Vulnerability Index that was required by the Global Warming Solutions Act, and do some training for municipal partners.
So I'm a little confused with the limited service positions that you just talked about,
Yes.
that you really feel should be based and should be ongoing, because the work will be ongoing.
Correct.
Would be in the Climate Action Office?
No,
They'd be in the what office?
they're in we're calling it Environmental Justice
Oh,
Unit.
environmental justice, okay.
Correct. I'm happy to jump ahead to that if you
Oh,
want.
no, I see it's on the phone page.
Yeah.
Okay.
All of the with the exception of the EJ unit, the 3 major one-time proposals in the Secretary's Office all relate to climate. So the continued work of the Climate Office, contractor supported work of the Climate Office, this Clean Heat Homes initiative, which would augment some congressionally directed spending that Senator Leahy secured for collaboration between VHFA, BEIC, and Vermont Gas, and be able to extend this program to have a statewide focus statewide reach as opposed to a Chittenden County focus. But it's really focused on whole home climate improvement. So being able to work with individual homeowners and think about not just weatherization over here or a clean heat system over here, but kind of how they actually overhaul their home.
Is that all going to be on-bill financing, or just on-bill financing that VHA is doing is going to be kind of used when?
Used when appropriate. The intention is that it would scale depending on the income level.
And that's
So
the one, the VHA program is the one.
correct, it would take advantage of that.
So this
system
is
that they-
actually to help finance climate improvements in their homes. It's not the consultation like Heat Squad, they heat audits,
Well,
but it
then,
would build on, once the audit's been completed, where those improvements have been identified and needed.
no, it would include some of that sort of homeowner education or outreach and securing their interest in the program as well.
How much do you think would be available to actually go toward financing or paying for the improvements?
Let me get back to you on what the proposed allocation is.
I mean, I just think about the take up we've had on water systems. Yes, and I was thinking this would be right up there,
Yeah, no, I
depending on the level of support.
agree. And it would be combined, there's the congressionally directed spending was about $8.5 million. So it does increase the reach of that program. But I can get you numbers about sort of the breakdown between kind of the outreach and education component and then the direct implementation. Generally, my understanding has been it's run about 20% for education and outreach, and then
The
80%.
education would be to techniques to lower your energy consumption.
Yeah, sort of working through a proposal with a homeowner that looks at what a whole home solution would look like, helping them understand the relative costs and benefits, and then making decisions about which
And
projects to
would you
pursue.
work through an existing program or agency, or where,
VHFA would be taking a lead role in that, and then with technical support from BEIC.
I see.
Do you know, do we have many communities or individuals even that have drilled down
Geothermal.
geothermal?
I don't know the answer to that.
It's quite expensive. The only person I know who's done it, Scott Beck, and he did it when he built his home. We do have a geothermal system down at the vet's home in Bennington. That was done a number of years ago, Dick.
Yeah,
There's
this is
a state building right next to that, unless it's.
Yeah.
Grassroots gym.
So I would think, that would,
In our climate, but it's more expensive to do that ground.
yeah, but if you could do 4 or 5 buildings with one
Oh, sure.
system.
Yeah.
I mean, what we're being offered. Heat pumps aren't working.
Well, they don't totally replace, we know that, nor they intended to, but I think with the ground source, in fact, that you can, those systems do provide sufficient.
If you went, if you drilled down and got the water coming up that was at 50 or
Right.
55 degrees,
Yeah.
But-
I don't
what we're
know,
being sold isn't like that.
Well, they're helpful
they reduce.
and they reduce. And as somebody that has 3 in a house, they're helpful. They just don't be all and end all.
But, so that there's not a lot of them around, and generally people have done them, maybe when they've done new construction.
Yeah.
But we've done them, certainly. I remember Bennington being, I think, one of the first we did that complex. I mean, it's Vet's home, it's State Office building. And a deer park.
I don't think the deer get due. What about the Bennington rest area?
Yeah, that must have.
Very busy. I gotta tell you, I'm signing out of this day about 15 cars.
Yeah,
Wow.
Senator Shears goes in and out about 30 times a day. so-
Increase the count.
Yeah, increase the count. So we're now down to refrigerant management.
Yes, and this is looking to reduce the use of high global warming potential refrigerants and specifically targeting mom and pop and smaller convenience stores to help them either replace the refrigerants or replace outright the systems. So these leaks on sort of a pound for pound basis are exceptionally damaging from a global warming perspective. And then finally, the environmental justice positions. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
On that, now that I go grocery shopping, I'm always amazed at the number of people that leave the darn doors open to those refrigeration units in a grocery store. I mean, you would think that the grocery stores would want an automatic closing door. I go by any of those frozen products, you'll see it, at least 1 or 2 doors open.
See, I know that now, for example, the lights don't go on until you walk by. They're not on. It used to be a lot of them were all open. Now they're all, closed in. So you think about the amount of energy it took to keep them cool, but I thought they did have, most of them do have that.
Well, price drop, I'll
Wow, jeez,
tell you that for sure.
we'll have to write the foundation.
Well, yeah.
Gotta hire a doorman.
And I
Well, you
would
would
assume
think,
all those
but,
new units
I
would
mean,
be.
don't you know, you don't do grocery shopping anymore, do you?
Not many.
Don't put him on record, Senator.
It's an eye opener, now I know what the price of everything is too.
Well,
But it amazes me to speak about refrigerant. I mean, that's a simple thing,
Don't worry,
self-closing doors.
those same people leave the door open or windows open at their house, they,
Their cars idling in the parking lot.
yeah. all this kind of, I mean,
You're generalizing, Senator. You don't know that. There may be just somebody going around wasting energy in the grocery store.
and an environmental justice position.
Correct, so the governor's
Under
budget.
three that you
Yes, correct, and we've, in our budget proposal last year, we had recommended moving our civil rights compliance director from a part-time position to a full-time position. And then that was all pulled into this environmental justice unit, and
So what did we do with the full-time? Did we make it full-time?
you made it full-time, but provided one-time money to pay for it. So, and that, I think that shows up a little bit on our budget development form, which should be the last page of the packet, in that there was this labeled climate office corrections, but actually I think that was intended to be a reduction in our budget as it moved into the environmental justice unit, and it just didn't quite get all the way there. So that's part of what we're correcting for in our true up, but then also leads to the fact that all of our environmental justice positions are currently on one-time money.
Question to the secretary. Are you staying to monitor, or are you, otherwise, if we have questions of the secretary, chance to leave, now's your chance. That's kind of what I'm asking.
I have another commitment at 2:30, but Maggie and Meg, I believe, are both planning to
Oh,
stay.
okay, well, it's only 1:45. So
Yeah.
Any questions of the secretary before we actually move into the individual departments? And according to the schedule, which is right in back of you in our high tech, unlike the house that has all these fancy screens.
Look at that, I'm right on time.
You are
Yeah.
right. We're moving into fish and wildlife.
Can I guess?
You
One quick
may.
question, I won't get us off schedule, and that is the memo that you talked about the environment. Would that be something that would come here, or you would work with like the policy committees on?
So we have shared it with Senator Brain and Representative Sheldon, but happy to provide a copy to this committee as well.
And what were they gonna do with it?
I don't know. We did provide it to Representative Squirrel as well as our liaison with
What's natural resources for us?
Bobby.
Bonnie?
Like
I don't remember.
Phil Bruce.
I'm not sure I
Somebody
know.
else.
I know. New Alice. Ginny?
They're in the sea.
Jen.
So that makes sense.
Okay.
I was just checking my list.
Should I follow up with
Sorry.
Senator Lyons on any of this since she wasn't able to join us today?
I think it would be a good idea to, send the, because we're keeping a list of all the requests, so I think you can send it to Senator Lyons. I've been getting some, I forwarded them, Andrea, and Stephanie are tracking them all.
Okay.
So
So the environmental justice memo, you can go to
Yes.
all of them?
Yeah,
I'll take care of that.
simply because we want to make sure that it's on our list for consideration. It's like a fairly lengthy list.
Yes,
If you bump the net lit number up, we might get a $500 million over the budget.
Yeah, we're working on it. If you would do that, but I think basically what you're saying is you would like the funding to be base funding for the 3 positions.
Correct.
We created them last year
Yes.
and they were limited service.
Yes, the intention that, our understanding had been the intention was that for them to be permanent basis, but when we received our budget at the end, it was not that.
All right, we'll put them for consideration. And if there are other questions, Andy?
I don't have a question. I'm telling the chair that at 1:55.
Yes, I know you have to go with it now.
They're running a little behind, so he's gonna let me know, I'll let you know when they're ready.
Okay, give me a secret.
Yeah.
Or not so secret. Then why don't we move into fish and wildlife? So you have the commissioner here. Switch seats here.
Good afternoon. For the record, I'm Christopher Herrick, Commissioner of Department of Fish and Wildlife. And in the spirit of old school, I brought paper copy. And so I'll just go through it, and if you have any questions, please stop me at any time. Our budget is, as the secretary said, not as complex as some of the, as DEC might be. I'm on page 3, and you can see just the overview. So it looks like this. So, pretty straightforward. The total change is only 246,000 from previous year.
And most of that's in personal services.
That's
not the
correct.
expense.
Yep, that's right. And, you know, I will highlight the general fund increase is a one-time ask. And I'll get to that. I'll circle back to that.
Yes.
What's the decrease for operating expenses about?
So that was a one-time land acquisition from previous year. Thank you for asking. So this is just a graphic of where the money goes. And you might be surprised to find that the largest percentage goes to our fisheries division.
I like that it just says.
Oh, no, walleyes.
Well, we don't give $8 million for walleye.
We have to rely on the capital bill to fund the
I think it's a $30,000.
Oh, they moved it from 25 up?
Oh, I don't know.
Oh,
I think it's wishful thinking.
maybe.
And then, have you all eaten walleye?
No, I don't
Oh, my
like freshwater
goodness.
fish.
You know, people who don't like fish, like walleye.
It's
My
a
dog
bass.
likes walleye.
It's a bass, right?
It's a perch,
A perch. Oh.
yes.
I like it.
You do? All right. Follow it. So the second is wildlife, as you might expect.
What fishery, that's because of the cost of operating the fisheries is significant.
Yes, we have 5 hatcheries.
Down.
And the number of personnel, we also do a lot of research in the summertime. We have a boat, the dory that we operate. That is they go out almost every day during the summer. And so just to give you an example of the work they're doing, they gill net or catch a fair number of lake trout. We're studying the lake trout population. One of the things that they discovered is the wild lake trout reproduction is getting to a point that because of our lamprey control, we will likely be reducing the number of stocked lake trout that we put in Lake Champlain, because they're reproducing naturally in the wild, which is a huge success. It is, and it's because of the, this research, this work we do in conjunction with the University of Vermont, studying what they eat, and just as an inside baseball kind of thing, when we stock fish, we clip their fins and we move where we clip around every year, so we can say this fish was put in the lake by us 3 years ago. And in that way, we can tell wild from clipped, or from stuff.
So
Yes, go ahead.
how many fishing licenses do we sell and how many hunting licenses?
I will have to get you the exact numbers. Let me write that down. But I think the total,
I guess you survived, Senator Lyons. Come on
So
over.
far, so good. Two committees.
Yeah, fine.
Because you have the budget, but you don't have the revenue.
right, that's right. I can get you those numbers. I'll email them over.
They've been declined.
It's, well,
Or
I
now
think- I thought fishing was
off
holding
again.
its own.
fishing is
And,
leveled off.
and hunting was dropping off.
Hunting's dropped a little bit. And we actually just, this is news, so you're gonna get this hot off the press. We found out yesterday that with respect to fishing, we may be actually undercounting the number because of the number of lifetime fishing licenses that are reprinted. Our contractor wasn't counting if they didn't have a hunter education course. So there's a chunk there that could be anywhere between 25 and 50% of underreported
For
which-
hunting
for
license,
just fishing.
oh, just fishing.
Of that subcategory. But the total is around 80,000 fishing and hunting licenses. But I'll get you the specific.
I only asked that because when I look at this, and I know the shift has been happening for fishing, whether this was reflective of what the license sales might be.
I don't think there's a correlation.
Okay.
I think that the number of fish hatcheries and the work that they do is just, it's expensive. So the warden service is coming in around 7.233. And just a shout out to them, as you are probably aware, they picked up some extra duties. They're meeting those extra duties with professionalism, and they're doing a great job. And what we become aware of at the department is sadly there is a number of animal cruelty cases out there because they're investigating those.
Well, let me ask, I had an email from a former senator talking about whole issue of animal cruelty and where that, responsibility should be. Ag department didn't feel that they were the right place, but certainly that is a very significant issue, and I'm not sure this committee's gonna deal with it, but it's something about where, if there's a state role, then where would that locus of responsibility?
So there probably is a state role, and I can tell you that there are discussions about that very topic going on in the administration.
Well, that's,
Well, to follow up on
you're thinking of former senator.
that, yeah, but I also thinking of a certain case in Bennington County recently where the state police seem to have the Fish and Wildlife personnel look at the situation rather than the state police determining whether there was animal cruelty or not. And, you know, the neighbors were complaining about the treatment of the animals. And, it was like nobody's really responsible for it.
Well,
And the pig was living in the house. That was one of the complaints that struck me. You know,
I think that's really good. You really.
There are
Pigs
some,
in the
there are
house.
some
Yeah,
things.
the pig was
that do
living in the
that are
house.
attached.
nothing
It
wrong with
was
a pig
not
living in the
illegal,
house.
right? Not illegal to have a pig live in your house. I didn't know that until I saw that.
So just so you know, right now,
But who is,
we are, right now, we are, we have an agreement with the state police. And so, I wouldn't characterize it as them not wanting to, they are stretched thin. And
You
so,
probably have more expertise to evaluate animal conditions. I don't
I'm
know.
not sure, but I do know that we are ready to take on those extra roles right now. And so it is our responsibility and we're doing it, with that professionalism that I mentioned.
and then a lot of communities have, you know, the, not the police, but a game,
Animal control officer.
control officer.
A dog catcher.
I had a bill a couple of years
So,
ago.
I mean, it all gets very confusing and it looks like everybody, to the neighbors that contacted me, it looked like everybody was passing the buck.
Well, I would say that you can advise anybody that if they have an animal cruelty complaint, they certainly can reach out to the wardens and we will be able to.
Good to know.
Well,
Or sometimes you would just email you and.
Me directly?
Yeah, I would.
I wouldn't advise that.
I would advise, that's what I would do.
Well,
I-
and
I
that's, you're
did-
welcome to do that. And the general public emails me on a regular basis.
I bet. Well,
Well-
they do us too. let me tell
I'm
you.
sure they do.
I bet they.
So Senator Steers, you need to finish up, then Senator Westman.
Well, no, I just was, you know, it's clear that calling the state police was probably the first mistake.
I
Well, they
wouldn't
would
call it a
refer.
mistake. They will transfer it to us at this point. And just getting into the system, calling 911, that works as well.
Good, Senator
we've
Westman.
had some testimony on it
Yeah,
in our committee in agriculture this year. And, you know, and what little we've done, if it's a grazing animal, it ends up at ag. And, you know, one of the top three, you know, were abuse. One of the biggest cases was goats in July.
I thought you were gonna say in somebody's house.
No, they had the goats in July. It was quite a bad
That was
case.
a bad case.
That was a very bad case, which is kind of halfway between UNA. You know, if you look at the top three classes of animals, that horses are there and because they're grazing. It really speaks to somehow the legislature needs to think about what this looks like.
Well, I would say this.
Maybe.
The warden service right now is the first call. Here's what we also do. If it's farm animals, we bring in the ag folks.
Yeah.
If it's not, we bring in the Humane Society of the United States or of Vermont's chapter. And so what our folks are really good at is knowing, okay, we don't have the expertise on a large animal, but we know who does. And they can say this animal's fine. I mean, I couldn't tell you the difference between a healthy horse and an unhealthy horse. There was a horse in Grand Isle. Everybody was calling, oh, it's emaciated. Well, it wasn't. But I'm sure somebody from ag or a horse person would be able to tell you the difference. So that's what we're really good at. We are the coordinating group right now. I don't think the legislature wants to wade into this. I think the administration is working on it and will come up with a solution that solves the problem appropriately.
Well, then that's the most important thing, knowing that it's a topic of discussion
It
and trying
absolutely
to
is at the
set up
highest level.
and set
Well,
up the
that's
protocol.
good for,
Yeah.
because I don't think in the testimony that we took in ag, that's become clear for me.
Oh,
But,
okay.
And I
The
think,
secretary might want to add.
Just that there was Act 147 of 2022 that did require a report on this, that the Department of Public Safety produced, and I'm happy to forward that to
what
you.
did they recommend?
They recommended that we needed a broader coalition to look at this. I think their preferred approach was creating a specialized unit potentially housed in agriculture, but then had questions about whether it made sense to actually create a
So
sort of
this-
a third entity.
So basically, then what you're doing is putting together the protocols, you're the point of contact, and then you determine who would, and what department within state government is the most appropriate
That's right.
place to, and you do the follow-up with that agency.
And
As
handle any
opposed to say,
criminal-
yeah, because I think so many times people say, oh, no, we don't do it, call there. And there it says, oh, no, don't call me, call there. So I think it's encouraging to hear that you
Yeah.
put, this system in place. So once the call comes in,
Right.
that it is handled.
I think it's fair to say that the buck stops at the Department of Fish and Wildlife.
Senator.
Yeah. Well, we looked into it, because of circumstances and like over in Maine, they have 8 people. It's all they do is work on animal control and complaints and we didn't feel that we were in a position here in Vermont to have a whole building full of people just dealing. So I think that's great that you folks are the key
Point of
point.
contact.
And then you get ag or state police if you need to, or union officers. I think, let's see how that works.
Well, I think it's important to note that we will do that as long as needed, understanding that a longer term solution is probably in the works, but it's premature for me to say what that would look like, because I don't know. Then I would point to,
One for animals.
Well, you've got so many different relations, because towns have their animal control out, and they do an awful lot with domestic pets.
Yeah.
And they have their shelters that they refer, so, it's kind of you've got different levels of involvement and different areas of where you would bring in the expertise, so, it's a matter of putting together a protocol that, people don't feel bounced around, or it's sort of like this kind of thing.
Correct.
Nobody is assuming any.
that's exactly right.
And the report that the secretary mentions training for those animal control officers, which we don't have at this point. And Maine does mandatory training, so there's a whole lot of things.
Oh, maybe it's online and we can filter it.
The local animal control officers, very local ones.
Yeah.
Are they under Department of Health?
No, they work for the town,
They're only the town,
that's right.
but there's no nexus with Agency of Natural Resources or Agriculture.
Well, they might follow up, if, depending on the nature of the complaint. I remember many, many years ago, we had a farmer
Those are
who,
good.
their dead cattle, I mean, they were starved, they were just, the dead carcasses were thrown down in the manure pit. And actually, the select board was the entity that went in originally with that. There were criminal charges brought against the individual. So I think, if it can be done locally and it's, cats or dogs and they've got a structure, but I think some of these others probably rise to the occasion. So dial 911 and otherwise just know that you're the locus, you're kind of the entry point,
Right.
and then you'll make the referral as appropriate based on the
We will handle it,
circumstances.
that's correct.
Okay. And
Thank
more
you for
work
that
to be
work.
done, and more work to be done.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the last thing I'd like to point out is probably, it's the smallest box, but where do we get our bang for the buck out of that? For the outreach folks. Probably everything you know about the Department of Fish and Wildlife, other than what I told you because of them. They do the Wildlife Watch on Channel 3 every Tuesday night. Oh, that's tonight, 6:45. They also do, there are social media presence. They run the camps at Buck Lake and Kehoe, where we run, I think it's like 900 kids a summer through there, teaching them about conservation. And a lot of the other stuff called the press releases, they do an amazing job. So, that's,
I would just have, and I said this to you
Yeah.
before, that I think the population here is moving away from a population that was more connected with agriculture, more connected with open lands, and more of a rural base. We have a lot of people that are here now. They grew up in suburbia, and it's a different point of view. And
They have deer eating their shrubs too like crazy in suburbia.
well, they may, but there's a very different understanding for people that have never had to deal with wildlife populations other than, and I think in some respects, the message of controlling market populations isn't getting across.
As opposed to appears a repugnant act of hunting any animal.
You know.
No, and that's a great point, Senator, and we had the discussion earlier. The other thing I would also mention that we are combating is, for lack of a better term, the Disneyfication of wildlife. Everybody thinks a bear is their friend, cute and cuddly,
Oh.
but they're not. Last year, we had 1,300 bear conflicts. 1,300,
Was that calls to you?
yes.
Yeah, because I didn't call you when they ripped down my bird feeder.
Your
Yeah.
bird feeders
Well,
are
it should have
coming
been taken
down.
down.
In March.
Well, it was time.
Well,
This time of year.
They're getting up earlier.
Yeah.
So they don't go to bed.
Well,
But the growing season keeps going, they don't even hibernate.
so, and those are the, so we're messaging about that. But too many people think wildlife are cute and cuddly. And
Think about the
we
people
want them
in
to
that.
remain wild. And so that's part of our messaging. But your point is well taken.
And we tried to do food waste. We dug the, and we got the thing from Lemoyle Solid Waste to put in the ground, and they ripped the top right off.
Oh, they dug ours right now, I know.
So, and we didn't call, so it was way more than 1,300.
So,
So what is your administration then? What is in administration, Commissioner?
well,
Because the wardens are in a separate
Right.
personnel bucket.
so we have a business office, our licensing office, the office of, administrative services, myself. And I have a principal assistant. Yeah, let me just look at that real quick. Maybe if I'm missing anything, I think that's probably the majority of. Yeah,
It seems like 4 million of your budget. You must have some other stuff other than you and.
is that where we cover some of our instructors' costs too as well?
I'm not 100%.
Yeah, I'll check on that exactly, but it, we have a fairly sizable, business office that we manage a lot of grants. I mean, the PR and the DJ grants that we funnel through has to go through there.
Yeah.
I'll get you a breakdown of that.
Well, I'm sure we've got it. But I was just wondering. So personal services, oh. Key budget changes. I've gone on to.
Yep, no, that's where I am next as well. So we try to keep our seasonal staff returning. Of course, it's a struggle right now to find workers. So they get a step increase for at least 5 years in that hole. So that's some of that cost, COLA and healthcare costs. The operating expenses, we did some work up in the, we just did. Contracts just go up a little bit in terms of habitat management. Our WMAs, we need to manage those. We buy all this land, we have 104. And that
I have a
requires-
question.
Yeah, sure.
And it's come up. at your access areas, you actually have the porta potties there at
Yes.
all of them.
Yes.
Are you experiencing difficulty? And the reason I ask is transportation have been doing some in West Amble along the LVRT. You've got Joe's
Yep.
Pond Beach, you've got all the bikers, you've got a park and ride. And the AOT experience was that there was the provider wouldn't even provide them because people were so putting materials that were, I don't know, permissible, or I don't know what, can't think of all the description. But obviously, they were having trouble with their provider. And I was just wondering what your experience has been. Maybe you have a different clientele, I don't know, more connected with
Well,
something.
I'm not sure, we're not having that experience.
You are.
For the most part, obviously, there's the onesies and twosies. And in terms of the clientele, I'm not sure everybody using the portalettes are anglers. There's one on my way to work every day, and there's always somebody there.
Well, if it's on Route 7, it might be Senator Sears.
It's on Route 2. But
Well,
there,
it isn't me.
and I've actually, I stopped to do a personal inspection on some of them. They're immaculate.
Okay, well, that's great.
Our contractor does a great job, and in many of them, they are ADA compliant as well, which is something that we are working on a lot of our fishing access sites, is to make them ADA compliant in other ways. So the docks are ADA compliant for people who want to fish, maybe get on a boat. And so that's a lot of the work that we do at the department.
I'm a regular at the Sunoco in Rutland.
I see.
So much so that they say hi to me and Senator, have a safe trip the rest of the way to Montpelier. Once in a while they have complaints, but, there just aren't facilities between Bennington and Montpelier if you're going north. There is nothing. Now I have used the one in Killington, that little pond there.
Does it have a portal?
You mean
The porta potty.
I just want to be clear.
Well, you can't, they don't plow it in the winter time, so you can't get in there. There is no, they take.
Got a pipe running out.
Actually, I've never seen it damaged or any.
Well, I'm glad to hear that because,
This must be a thing in Caledonia County.
it must be in my hometown, but anyway, AOT is like saying, we don't want any part of this. You will give grants to the towns and the towns can manage but when you're getting a lot of, Lamoille Valley Rail Trail has a
Sure,
lot
yeah.
of traffic. And so it was kind of disappointing that the efforts to provide that amenity on the trail was being so abused with,
Well, make them put a flush toilet.
well, yeah, right into Joe's Brook, right?
Well, no, they'd have to put a septic system.
Well, the issue is who would be responsible? That's pretty costly for a little village of West Amble.
No, Agency of Transportation, you got two of you right here.
Yeah, well, good. I don't think we're get that in the plan. So why don't we move from porta potties to your one-time investment?
Okay, yeah, and I think that's probably really the most important.
Well, I don't know, I think a porta potty.
Oh, when you need one.
Tractor.
We're gonna try to find a fishing access for you.
Thank you.
We'll put up a-
If you were on Route 2, Marty's has got both outside porta pot and inside.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, the little Dorset store has outside.
So we now have
So
one-time
with the
investments.
one time, the enhancement of our, that's, we want to be able to keep Buckley up and running, and so that's going to include the roofing for the buildings there. It's getting deteriorated, so that's important. And we also have a number of other outbuildings that support our WMAs. So that's the lion's share of that money, as well as making things more accessible, whether it's a roadway into a WMA. And then the one time is in relation to a claim against the department for it's going to end up being about $199,000 You mentioned deer eating shrubs, well, this is deer eating crops.
Well, what about bears? They actually can devastate a whole cornfield.
They can, and they're exempt actually, from this statute. They're more, liability is applicable more to like an apiary. But there's a statute that was passed in 1969 that makes the department.
I think Bobby must have sponsored that.
Well, we were in front of Senator Starr's committee last Friday to try to get that language repealed.
We
And-
call them top block.
But we're back this Friday. But this is to help cover the cost of that settlement.
So is it that simple that if the deers eat your corn?
It's not corn.
They got into the goods,
This is
Marijuana?
an organic farm, not, no,
organic.
Brussels sprouts, broccoli,
Of course. Oh, they love the brassicas.
yeah, and,
I didn't know you could file a claim.
well, neither did we. And,
Do they eat asparagus?
are we
No
going
doubt.
back to the
No,
portal
they
again?
don't. They don't.
Because she's got a patch.
They don't.
Wait,
They don't
so
do
let me be clear, there are some hoops on this. Your income has to be derived 50% of it at least from that farm.
Mhm.
In this case, they certainly did. Everything is appropriate on this claim. The problem is, we don't budget for this, you know, it becomes unpredictable. And so we're trying to find a better solution than frankly the Department of Fish and Wildlife underwriting farmers. And Senator Starr understands this, as does this committee.
So what do you want to do,
Worst case,
repeal
yeah.
this?
So that is where we are there, but we're still on the hook this
Right,
year.
yes.
And so $150,000 one time is in there. And then we're gonna find the rest in our operating budget.
Yeah, because it's really
So-
190.
It's about, we haven't actually signed the agreement and settled, but it probably will be $199,000.
Okay, so Andy and then Jennifer.
I also heard that the Fish and Wildlife could either help or be responsible for fencing to prevent deer to get into crops. Is there, there's no connection there?
We encourage that. But we,
Because like, if you don't have a fence and the deer come in here and eat all your apples, for example, you're not gonna make, I assume you couldn't make a successful claim because you didn't have a
No, there's
fence.
no requirement to have the fence.
So I thought I talked to an orchard owner once that said, oh yeah, the
We
state helped
encourage-
me with the, but they said the state helped them with the fence.
Well, maybe through,
Yeah.
working landscape.
But maybe because they didn't want to get a claim, so they were like, okay, maybe it's cheaper to help you with the fence.
And that may have been
This was years ago, it
Yeah,
was over
that's-
20 years.
I think I know where that was. The one thing we also do is issue a depredation permits. So if it's more than 4 deer, deer seem to be a problem. We're also offering to change the legislation so that a farmer doesn't need to get that tag, they just need to get authorization from me, but it would be through the warden.
So,
It can be verbal.
That's the problem. Bobby's gotta fix this.
well, it's
Well,
because it's by
we're-
farmers as opposed to other entities, yeah, I guess it falls into that. All right, so we'll rely on Senator Starr, Senator.
And you may not know this because it was, a long time ago, but was the thinking that the state should have managed the deer herd in such a way that it didn't get into the crops, and therefore it's like in loco parentis of the deer?
So we had this discussion that what was the legislative intent? And it was so long ago, without, I mean,
69 was a while back.
I was 4.
50 years ago.
We don't know, and the cost was probably so insubstantial then that nobody anticipated a bill of this amount when it was passed. And so, and I think it's important that while we do manage the herd, we don't control them. And I want to make sure that.
So woodchucks come under this too?
No, No, they're not,
And bears don't,
And wild animals doing,
No, but they do for aviaries.
correct,
but
that's a different statute.
yeah, that's a different statute, but under this, bears aren't, and bears do more damage to cornfields. than
Oh, they do.
See, over the last few years, or quite a few, it's run $8,000 to $10,000 to $11,000 in total, right?
The only claim that we've had with this was about $9,000, and it's not every year.
I mean, this
This
is
is
a
very
really,
infrequent.
It's just deer or are there others?
We've had cases of bear into,
But in this statute.
but the
it's just-
statute covers only deer? It says wild animals.
well,
So-
it,
How broad is the
statute
wild
covers-
animals?
covers deer for crops, but it doesn't cover bear for crops. But it covers them for
So the
bee
bear can roll
hives.
in my cornfield.
They do, and that's what they do. They go into the
Oh, I know
cornfield.
they'll just, the whole center will be just,
That's right. They eat it, they
Even
eat it till they throw up, then they roll in it, and then they eat more. They disperse themselves as they're getting ready to hibernate.
all right, well, we'll leave that up to our esteemed
Wow,
ag
we're
committee, of which there are two
wondering why.
members here.
there's all kinds of different federal agencies that insure different things. So we have those folks coming in to see if we can.
Okay.
All right, so then we just have your ups and downs here.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Have I moved too fast?
No, the other page has a little more, just,
For your position.
actually gives more information on the one time. I think we've covered it. And then there's the budget development. I can answer any questions on that.
It's pretty straightforward.
And we'll get that information that you
Well, how are we
requested.
doing with bats?
So there's some kind of encouraging information.
What was it, the smutty nose, what was it?
It was
called?
a white nose
White
disease.
nose.
And so I can tell you firsthand, I went out with our vet bio. And by the way, I have the greatest job, because I get to do these cool things. I went out with my vet biologist and we captured about 120 bats.
And we had one up here in the Senate chamber.
You didn't kill it, right?
I hope not.
I know it's not too,
No, I
because
think,
they're probably endangered. But anyway, we went out and captured 125 bats, we swabbed them for disease. And one of the cool things that we discovered is some of them had scarring from white nose disease on
oh,
their.
so they had built up a tolerance.
They survived, and so, and the numbers were decent, and then there was just a count of a long-eared Indiana bat, a brown bat, and the numbers were encouraging. But, we're not there yet. But the research that's going on is phenomenal, and that's, gives me the opportunity to mention that the fish and wildlife biologists, I would put them up against any scientist, any state of the country. They're dedicated people who've been around for 40 years because they believe in what we do. And they do a great job. We're very lucky to have them here. And we are one area when it comes to hiring full-time people, whether it's the warden service or biologists, we have a waiting list. We have no problem because the work they do is respected.
And also, I think there can be nothing more rewarding to be out and see magnificent animals than this board is setting. Kind of beats an office job.
That's why I try to get out as much as I can, but it's still the administrative that I got hired to do. So,
Well, other questions or comments? I realize that we've got, what?
So I realized that you come on break.
Well, we're supposed to go to break at 2:30, but that means
You guys could just keep moving.
the other commissioner who's here, Commissioner Wheeling, is gonna be sitting a long time. I'm thinking maybe we should keep going, and take that testimony.
Thank you all for your time.
Thank you
If you have
very
any questions,
See you Friday.
yeah, I'll see you Friday, Senator.
We'll go to DEC, which is got the big budget here. Secretary's leaving on that note.
Yes. Thank you for having me.
Anytime. You take a break? All right, well, we're gonna keep going. Yes, you.
Yeah, for the
That's
record,
okay.
John Dealing, I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Environmental Conservation. I was gonna rely on my, on the slide deck that was sent, if that's okay. I just printed it up here. So, the first slide,
We have it.
Yeah.
you have,
We
you
have.
haven't printed up.
Yeah,
Oh,
we
great.
already
Good. I thought Chris was-
Okay, all right.
Excellent, excellent. All right, so really just to take a look at the budget overview. As Secretary Moore mentioned, we have the largest budget in the agency. And there's been some significant increases due mostly to the bill, the bipartisan infrastructure law money that we receive from the federal government. And that shows up in, if you look at basically the federal funding, you look at the significant upticks from 33 million to 41 to 77. So we're getting a lot of federal infrastructure funding, and we are working very hard to get it out the door.
And the match on that is what, 80-20 or?
It really depends. Some of it, there's no match. There's several,
Oh, we like that.
Yeah, we really like that. The biggest one that we had put in for the capital bill for a match is the state revolving fund monies. We do need to match that. We got a large amount of money for emerging contaminants, things like PFAS, that was no match. So we've been very fortunate to get these kinds of resources in our doors recently. If you look at kind of, where it goes, we've got employees, operating expenses. We issue a lot of grants. That's a large part of what we do. We get these monies out. They come in from the federal government typically, and then we get them out the door to Vermonters. If you
So,
look-
you talked about your federal funds, which have gone up 33 to 77. Your special funds have gone from 33 to 57. What are the primary sources of your special funds?
So some of those, so our special funds are basically EPA funds. So we are getting some additional funding from the EPA. from
Separate
our-
apart from the federal funds.
These, yes, from the bill. No, I'm sorry, I misspoke. The special funds, I should mention, I have my budget director, Joanna Polito, is online, and also Tracy LaFrance, and they are the real architects behind all of the budgeting we do. So I would actually defer to Joanna or Tracy and give you some more details on the sources of the special funds you see on
Okay,
this
well,
table.
we can see, you're not in the,
That's Joanna, yeah.
you're not in Florida?
I am.
Oh, yeah, I even asked the question.
And Andy says hello.
Oh, tell Andy hi.
Definitely. Yeah, so our special funds, as Commissioner Bailing was saying, we have about 20 different special funds. They range from the Environmental Contingency Fund, Petroleum Cleanup Fund, our environmental permit funds, the Clean Water Fund, special funds come into that. So we have quite a myriad of funds. And I think the page that Commissioner Bailing was referring to, we were 55 million last in our 23 budget for special funds. We're projecting at just over 57 million in the 24 budget. So an uptick of about 1.8 million from last year's budget. The actuals might look off a bit, like 33 million, which is, I think, what you were looking at, Senator Kitchell. Those basically are the actuals, and that's all about a timing issue. Our budgeted amount was likely much higher, but we encumber things into purchase orders and what have you, at the end of a fiscal year, but it wasn't necessarily paid out. So a lot of times you'll see our actuals being quite different in some cases from the actual budget, but it's more of a timing issue between spending of the funds out of purchase orders, but we have to budget at that higher number to get the ability to have the spending authority to encumber.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Absolutely.
It's actually been fairly consistent, I think.
Yeah.
So if the next page, you look at our divisions by our budget overview by program division, you'll see that the largest one by far these days is Water Investment Division. There's the office that is primarily responsible for distributing both the ARPA and the bill funds. So a lot of the monies come through their office. So that's why that budget is so large. Waste management prevention, they deal with all the PFAS issues that we're facing. They're dealing with the PCB issues that we're facing. So they're a very busy division these days and therefore have a large budget. Watershed management is actually our largest division, but their budget is reflective of that because there's not as much money that flows through that. Drinking water, groundwater protection, again, they're recipients of a fair amount of the monies coming in as well. They're working on emerging contaminants. They're the ones who will deal with water systems that need remediation for PFAS, things of that nature.
So the alum treatments were referenced like Comar.
Right.
Would that be under your watershed management division?
Yes,
Okay.
that's water.
And that's Oliver?
Oliver Pearson is the program director for the Lakes and Ponds program. So Oliver's responsible.
I just want to pass on, Lake Maury, actually I've been involved because they almost lost their lake to milfoil.
Yeah.
And they were the first to be approved for this. It was, renovate lake
Right.
and stuff. And they've actually had great success in the eradication of milfoil with no impact on fish like or indigenous plants. And so they have a lot of work with Auburn. They speak so highly of it. So I just wanted to recognize that kind of face of government as it relates now. Of course, they're quite concerned about any moratorium on treatment of lake because they tried everything before they went to this, and they hate to see the progress that they've made somehow.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Oliver really does do a great job. My understanding is the bill H31, they took out the moratorium and it's going forward as a study only. So that's my understanding. We were in there twice last week.
Well, I would think you could even look at the actual experience in some of these lakes and the treatment and there are a number of scientists who live on the lake that are testing the water all the time. And so it would seem like we do actually have some, I wouldn't call them clinical, but whatever you would call them, actual experience with what some of the progress has been made and what would be any identifiable adverse impacts as well.
Right, and the way we manage the program is whenever we do a treatment, we do 5 years of follow-up. So we're very cognizant. And our intent is to get away from the herbicides, is to do herbicides. We're trying to do it one time only. And for example, Lake Iroquois in Heinsberg, they were able to do one treatment and didn't have to go back to using the herbicide. So that's always our intent, what we do. It's kind of a last resort. Sometimes it's really your only resort. So we feel comfortable with the science going forward. I'm just going to go to the next slide, 5 for you. Some key budget changes. We talked about the bill monies. Julie had touched on that. Secretary Moore touched upon that. So this is the state revolving loan funds, brownfields, super fund sites. So this is, again, we're getting a lot of money into our coffers to use on a number of different programs, very important programs. State revolving loan funds are huge for communities trying to upgrade their infrastructure. Brownfields, a great use of public money. I've been involved with brownfields for over 20 years now, and it's just a great way to kind of partner up between the private sector and the public sector to get old abandoned buildings that are off the tax rolls that need to clean up and get them back into commerce, maybe get some jobs there, maybe get some housing in there. Just a great way to use.
Yeah, we funded quite a bit of money for brownfields.
It's really been a real success. It continues to be a success. I have to mention this. We are getting it's getting tough for ongoing operational costs. Kind of getting to a critical point in terms of resources. in key programmatic areas. And one of the things Secretary Moore touched on, and it's very real, is that the federal funding, despite all this, it seems strange to say this, but our real steady diet of federal funding, this is all going to go away. Right, this is a sugar high. We all know that. We're getting this money. This is not going to be repeated. This is a once in a lifetime. But the usual, just the monies we get from the EPA has stayed flat for many years. It has
Well, we
not been
do that
adjusted.
ourselves, you know. We love the shiny new objects and a lot of new money. And we kind of starve the basic infrastructure until we bring it to the brink.
And that's what's happening to us, where they're not adjusting for inflation. They're just not taking that, there's inflationary pressures, cost of healthcare, all of these things add up. And it gets harder and harder to manage.
So what
based
about
on-
fees in your department?
So there's no, as you know, we didn't bring forward a fee
I know
bill.
you didn't, but in
Yeah.
terms of,
I don't think it's any secret that most people will tell you that there needs to be adjustment to fees at some point, right? When the time is right. Fees are not a panacea, I'll say that. If you try to cover the gaps that we face with fees, people would leave our state because the fees would get crazy. If you really tried to, the original intent.
no,
of fees-
I'm not as a solution, but it certainly
It
does
is
help
as-
mitigate the overall impact.
Right, it's the three-legged stool, right? We have general fund, we have federal funds, and we have fees. And certainly at some point in time, we're gonna need, that's the only one that we really have a control over, ourselves. So if we can get our fees up a little better, a little higher, it would certainly help. It wouldn't hurt. So as noted here, we did, because of our budget necessities, we did put up one position for reduction in force. It was a lake-wise position. I would note that the House has recommended appropriating $55,000 for that position. That falls about $70,000 short for what it would cost to. It's approximately either 125. Some people will tell you $150,000 per year for salary and benefits, depending on the seniority or the qualifications of the employee.
So your budget, look, I know you have a target, we understand that. So you actually did a reduction in force of one position or more than one in total.
It was just one, and it was not filled. It wasn't, we didn't let someone go. It was just that we had this position on the books, and we've taken it off the books. As I
So the
said.
House is saying they would partially fund it.
Quarter. Or a third.
Third,
Yeah, you
depends.
get a third of a person.
We get a third of a person.
You better get the head.
I'll take the head open.
All right, well, I think what you're saying is perhaps there are some limitations with that response. Might not be too much better than the fact you got a vacant position, you haven't been able to fill it.
Right.
Okay, well, thank you for bringing that up. So whoever has, Ginny, are you natural resources?
I am.
Oh, good. Well, we'll just put that on, reduction in force, one part-time position. And
And could you give us or to show us like how much our fees are, like what the revenue is to the department?
I can get that.
that would be good.
If you go to slide 6, this is really the biggest for us. And especially the first one, this is something I really want to stress. So we proposed $10 million.
Now, we've already funded, I think, Healthy Homes twice
Yes.
before, so with the 10 million, we would be up to how many, what would be the total?
So I believe we have awarded $6 million. I'm not sure if that is represents the
Put
sum
in
total.
another 10 or 11? I just know the first round, the take-up was very strong, and the secretary asked for more, he appropriated more, and
And the need is enormous. I
I'm
think
sure it
this
is.
to me is the best program I've ever been involved with in terms of making direct impacts on people's lives. Just to give you a sense. So we started this with ARPA funding. We had an estimate kind of based upon what we knew about FINs, kind of based upon enforcement, permits, things of that nature.
It's like 5 million.
I thought we were expecting to get about 200 applications. The first day, when we went live on a Friday, late on a Friday afternoon, we gave out a number for a contract. When she got to work on Monday, there were 600 voicemails in her voicemail. So just to give you a sense, it just completely blew us away. We had no idea of the need out there. And just to give you a sense of who we're serving here, of the applicants who got funding in 2022, 54% reported a household income of less than $30,000 per year. 89% reported a household income of less than $50,000 per year. Replacing a septic system costs $30,000. Right? These are people who never would have been able to fix their septic system but for this one. And taking enforcement against them doesn't do anybody any good. They can't do it.
And they
So-
probably don't have sufficient equity to finance.
They don't typically know. So we've benefited approximately 625 Vermonters, 145 of them were seniors, and over 150 of them were children.
Is that
So
a report you're reading from?
this is some statistics that the director put together for, I'm happy to provide it to you.
That would be great.
Yeah, I'll send you, it's a slide deck that I have. But I can also email it to you. So we're a little distraught that the House had recommended cutting our, the ask from $10 million to $5 million. There's way more need than even the $10 million. This is, in my view, is we're gonna need to make this an evergreen program. This is not gonna go away.
Do you prioritize where these are for water quality benefits, like along shores or waterways or something like that? Or there's no geographical preference, it's just income?
It's basically income. It's really just first come, first served, income based. But there's a ton of need out there. I can't overstate it. It's something that we did not expect.
Low incomers wouldn't be on lake shores.
Well, they might be just floodplains, like near the,
You know,
I would assume we
home
would
parks
rather-
usually are.
it's more important not to have failed septic near water.
Well, they could be near a brook, you know, or, you know, some kind of, you know,
Knowledge.
There's clearly environmental impact to this, but a lot of this, a lot of what we do, and I think people don't understand that, a lot of it says Department of Environmental Conservation. We do a lot of public health work. A lot of things we do impact people's health. And that's really what this program is about. We're talking about houses where sewage, raw sewage is backing up into the house. That was not an uncommon find, where there's open cesspools. So this is, and that's what ARPA started by saying, look, if people have to shelter in place, they need to have a safe place to stay. That's really the impetus for this, and that's really what's kept it going. So clearly there's environmental benefits for not having a failed system, but there's an enormous public health benefit. So the other one-time investments.
like when the toilet paper was coming.
So you're only $5 million short on this.
21.
For this year, yeah. But as I said, I really think this is.
21.5 million, and so the 10's on top of that?
Yeah, you did 6.5 in mobile homes, 10, 15 and failed on site for low income.
Yeah, I should have clarified. The 6 million was just for the on-site. So there's two aspects to healthy homes. 6 million is for just either wells. It's mostly with septic systems, so it can go to well replacement as well. But there's the other component of healthy homes is manufactured home housing communities. That's been a big initiative of ours. And again, it's for the same type of thing. It tends to be more of a water or sewer infrastructure for those communities. So that's another aspect of this. And so the 10 million would include both the on-site, which I really focus on, to be more experienced with it. The manufactured housing communities piece really just started last year.
How do you define manufactured housing? There's a tremendous number of pre-built houses that are actually, they're modulars almost.
Right.
We tend to think of mobile homes, but some are double wides. So when you're talking about manufactured housing, how expansive is that? Because some of them are quite large, 2 stories, et cetera, and they're prefab in some ways, or they're modular. Is there a definition of what comes under manufactured homes?
I'm sure there is, and I can get it for you, but I don't know it off.
I mean, obviously we know mobile homes are automatically in that, but I was just wondering, how expansive.
Well, I was up in Williston and one that met the definition just the other day. It's beautiful. It was in great shape. It looked, you know, it was a really nice community. But it's probably an ACCD statute, if I had to guess, but I'm sure that, I know we have it.
Yeah, I'm sure we do.
What's covered for these programs.
I'm sure I've asked it before, probably forgotten it.
The other one that I want to mention, that we did get a reduction from the House, and this has to do with emissions repairs. So back in 2021, we were allocated $375,000 to set up an emissions repair program for low-income Vermonters whose vehicles failed emissions inspections. We tried twice to get that out to bid and found that just wasn't enough money. Basically, all we could really stand up with that kind of money was 1 year, a program for 1 year, which is questionable anyway, and no contract was willing to take on it. So we came back and said, well, let's get this so we can run it for like 3 years. And that was our ask for $1 million. And the House has recommended $200,000. And I can tell you
That is not enough to do it.
we'll have the same, so we won't be able to set it.
Well, I just want to caution the committee, we've added up what our one-time requests are, and it's over 300 million. So when you're thinking about what the House did or didn't do,
Well, and after the secretary comes in, we should add hers to that list.
yeah, well, 350 and growing, I guess. So Andy,
And do you remember for sure if this repair program was part of your SIP approval, the EPA, or maybe that was part of the discussion?
The emissions repair program is not part of our SIP approval. The repeal of the emissions waiver is part of our SIP approval. So I was not in this position at the time, but my understanding is those things were bifurcated. This wasn't, they weren't connected. There was a recognition that without the waiver for the emissions, there'll be some people who can't afford to fix their emissions. And so that was where this funding came from.
on the brownfields,
Yep.
the 2.5 million for assessments are up to 25. Last time we ran into feedback from the RPCs saying they were doing a lot of some of that preliminary work.
Yes.
And in a budget adjustment.
So there's another piece of brownfields at ACCD, and it's the RPC piece usually runs on the ACCD side.
Right.
Okay, so this is in addition, they're in the ACC, all right, that's all.
ACCD has a bit broader authority in terms of what they can spend the brownfield funding on. But we do expect that a good portion of this money will go to RPC. That's our expectation in the form of regulation.
I know they did a lot of the preliminary assessments.
Yes, and it makes a lot of sense. They're right on the track. If you want to go to slide 8, and this just shows kind of our position changes. As you see, we've got up quite a bit because of the ARPA limited service positions. So I believe at last count, we're at about 370 personnel, which is probably the most people who've ever worked in this department. That is going to sunset. It's going to kind of crest over the next couple of years and tail off. But we really need these people to get these programs working. Slide 9, just an overview. We've already really touched on deployment of ARPA and bill funds. The PFAS monitoring, Secretary Moore touched on this. We needed to do this anyway, but we're also engaged in litigation with 3M and DuPont, and in part of that litigation, we really need to get a handle on how many private wells in Vermont are impacted by PFAS. We've got a very good sense of how many public water supplies are. We don't have as much information about private wells. So we've started this initiative. We know that at this point in time, we're probably getting close to 3,000 letters. We want to test 500 wells.
Yeah, we took some testimony in budget adjustment in terms of the process of your initiative.
Yeah. So that's underway. We are starting to get, I think we're up to about 200 positive responses to date. We had a really good initial response and then it kind of tailed off. But last I heard, we're at about 200. So hopefully we'll get where we need to get. The PCB testing, the Secretary Moore touched on, we're engaged with that. we think it's important to keep it going. I know there's been some discussion about pausing it, but yeah, I have a hard time. These are children and school employees, and I think we should know what's going on in those schools. So, and then Secretary Moore had mentioned the Clean Water Act, Act 76. We've had a lot of success with that, and we'll continue to fund a lot of these projects, which will really help improve water quality in Vermont. The budget development forms, the ups and downs, this is something I'm going to heavily rely on my budget directors to help me with.
But
They know it.
unless there's something, for example, that is really big or atypical, we don't get into, personal services, fee for space, computer, all those internal services. Is there anything here that really you'd like to draw our attention to? I mean, this is just to help us get the way, how did you arrive at the bottom line? You had ups and you went downs and what it netted out to. So, if there's something here, I can see the reduction in floors, the program, the position that you talked about. Some operating costs. The big one is pass through, but that's probably all federal, right? The 34 million.
Yeah, that's the infrastructure money, exactly, the bill money. That's the big change for DEC's budget, Senator Kitchell.
Okay, anything else while we're talking about money that you would like to point out on the budget development form? I think Andy might have been involved when we put this together.
It's been around a day or two, this form,
Around a
yes.
very long time. Yeah. We call them ups and downs, but now budget development sounds so much better, doesn't it? We don't
I
have
still call it ups and
we have
downs.
Onboarding, and we don't have wheelhouse and space, and it's very interesting, some of our
And you don't have
terminology.
state ladies.
What?
And you don't have state ladies.
No, we don't have state ladies anymore. So I think, the other big one is net and contract services, mostly because of infrastructure investment, as well as that's
Correct.
9 million, which is
Right.
IIJA. So in terms of general fund, it's very minimal.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah, and largely for the salary benefit ups that we're experiencing, much like every other department. So yeah, it's not a significant amount, and that's where it is mainly there.
Right. Questions we have on the money side in terms of how they arrived at the total amount? Otherwise, sounds like there's a lot going on in your department.
There certainly is. So I will get you the slide deck for healthy homes and the definition for manufactured housing.
And the revenue for the.
Fee revenue.
When was the last time there was a fee bill? Was it
2016.
16? And the report for joint fiscal, it says 11.1 was December.
That was the increase.
Yeah.
That's
what it
how
said.
many you receive or what?
That's what they received in 18. And if we haven't had a fee increase, it must be similar.
Annually, we range between $9 and $11 million in every year in our environmental permit fund, roughly. And it varies year to year because some of the permits are cyclical, but that's fairly accurate. And we can get you those numbers though to confirm if you need it.
Did you consider purchasing something besides the permit fee revenue?
I just wanted revenue for the whole department. I mean, I guess it's special funds, general funds, federal funds, so I guess the fees is the only one.
Yeah, otherwise the federal funds are, there's a column here for your federal and general.
Okay, yeah.
So, all right, if you print it out, then you give it to them now.
No, I don't give it to him now.
So I guess you could scratch that for me to do.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm doing it for you.
He's already
Yes,
up.
thank you so much.
Other questions of the commissioner? Otherwise, we are approaching 3 and we're going to take a break and then we'll go on to environmental. No, forest and park. Oh, yeah, I mean, we've finished environmental. We've moved our break to now, and then we're finishing up the forest parks and recreation today. Unless there are further questions of the commissioner, Regina?
Thank you.